The umbrella was broken. Snapped inside out by the wind, handle cracked, ribs bent the wrong way. It sat abandoned near the entrance of the bus station, like someone had given up on it halfway through a storm. I almost walked past it. Then I heard a child cough. I stopped. She was sitting on a bench just inside the sliding doors, her back curved like she was trying to make herself smaller. My niece, 34 years old. Her hair damp, her coat buttoned wrong. A little boy no older than 3 sat pressed against her side, his head resting on her arm, eyes half closed. 2 bags, overstuffed, sat at her feet. Not weekend bags. Not travel bags. The kind you pack when you don't know if you're coming back. I had not seen her in 4 months. She had stopped returning my calls in March. Her husband told me she was adjusting to family life. I let it go longer than I should have. I walked toward them slowly. When she looked up and saw me, her face did something complicated. Relief and shame arrived at the same time, the way they always do when someone finds you at your worst. "Aunt Ruth," she whispered. The little boy stirred and looked at me with her eyes, my late brother's eyes. That was when my chest tightened in a way it hadn't in a very long time. "What happened?" I asked, sitting beside her. She swallowed. She looked at the floor, then she said it quietly, like the words had been waiting too long to come out. "They told me to leave. My mother-in-law. She said someone like me was never supposed to be there in the first place." I did not speak right away. "Someone like you," I repeated. She nodded. She said I came from nothing, that my family had no name, no standing, that Marcus deserved better. She finally looked at me. She said I embarrassed them. The bus station was loud around us. Announcements, rolling wheels, strangers moving in every direction. But all I heard were those words. No name, no standing, came from nothing. I looked at my niece, the girl I had watched grow up after my brother died. The girl who put herself through nursing school working double shifts. The girl who gave up a promotion the year she got married because her mother-in-law said it looked bad for the family image. I looked at her son, falling asleep against her arm because children always know when safety has left the room. Then I reached over and picked up the broken umbrella from the floor beside them. "Come on," I said quietly. "Let's get him somewhere warm." She didn't ask where we were going. She just stood up. That was when I made my decision. Not the loud kind, not the kind people announce, the quiet kind, the kind that changes everything. 4 months earlier, I had noticed something was wrong. It was at Easter dinner, at the Hargrove estate, that was what they called it. The estate. As though naming your house made you royalty. My niece laughed too quickly that evening. She agreed with things she didn't agree with. She sat at the far end of the table, not beside her husband, and she looked at her hands whenever her mother-in-law spoke. I watched all of it. Her mother-in-law held court at the head of the table. She was tall, carefully dressed, with a voice built for making rooms go quiet. She spoke about lineage the way some people speak about religion, as though blood determined destiny, as though where you were born was a character judgment. "Family is the foundation of everything," she said that evening, and she looked directly at my niece when she said it. The right family. My niece smiled and said nothing. I drove home that night with both hands on the wheel and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. I called my niece the next day. She said everything was fine. I called again 2 weeks later. Voicemail. And then the calls stopped being answered at all. I told myself to be patient. I told myself she was a grown woman making her own choices. I told myself I was projecting old grief onto a new situation. But when you raise a child, even one who isn't yours by birth, you know the difference between quiet and silence. And she had gone silent. I just didn't know yet how deep the damage had gone. The drive from the bus station to my house was 40 minutes. My niece sat in the passenger seat and stared out the window the entire way. Her son slept in the back seat, strapped into an old car seat I had kept in the garage for years. He had not been in it in 4 months. "Tell me everything," I said. Not as a question. As permission. She exhaled. And she began. "It started," she said, "when she got pregnant. Her mother-in-law had been cool toward her before that, but pregnancy made things worse. She kept saying the child would carry their family name, that the name meant something. She started asking questions what her parents did, what her grandparents did, where the family was from. I kept my eyes on the road. She found out Dad was a factory worker," my niece said quietly. "She found out she stopped." "Go on," I said. "She looked you up. She said you ran a small catering business." That you were, she looked at her hands. She used the words, service class. I said nothing. She told Marcus I had misrepresented myself, that I had let him believe my family had more standing. She laughed once, bitterly. I never misrepresented anything. I was a nurse. I told him I was a nurse from the very first week we met. He knew everything about me. And Marcus? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. He didn't stop her, she said finally. He would say he'd talk to her. He would say give it time. She means well. Last week she sat me down and told me I was destabilizing the family. She said my presence was affecting their reputation in their business circles. She had a letter, typed. She slid it across the table like I was an employee being dismissed. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. And this morning, she said, Marcus told me she had arranged a mediator, someone to help with a mutual separation. He said he thought it was probably for the best. He said maybe we needed space. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. He already had my things packed. Both of us. Mine and our son's. The car was quiet for a long time after that. Aunt Ruth, she whispered. She really believes we're nothing. I looked at the road ahead. I know she does, I said. And that was the problem. Because she had absolutely no idea what nothing actually looked like, or what I had spent 40 years building from it. That night, I made soup. The kind my mother used to make, thick, warm, the smell of it filling the whole house the way real comfort is supposed to. My grandnephew ate 2 bowls and fell asleep on the living room couch, clutching a stuffed dog he found in the guest room. My niece watched him from across the room like she was afraid to look away. He doesn't understand what happened, she said softly. No, I agreed. And that's a mercy right now. After I covered him with a blanket, I went to my office and closed the door. My desk was old oak, bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. It had outlasted 2 failed partnerships, 1 lawsuit I won, and more setbacks than I cared to count. I sat behind it now and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder I hadn't touched in 2 years, thick, organized, rubber-banded closed. I took the rubber band off slowly. Inside were papers that would make my niece's mother-in-law's voice go very quiet indeed, not because of what they said about her family, because of what they said about mine. I had started a catering business, yes, that part was true. What she didn't know, what most people didn't know, was that the catering business was one of 8 companies, built over 4 decades, quietly, without press releases or charity galas or announcements of any kind. Real estate, hospitality, a small private investment group, a commercial kitchen supply company that had been supplying restaurants across 4 states for over a decade. I was not wealthy in the flashy sense. I did not wear it. I did not announce it, but I was substantial. And one of those 8 companies, the hospitality group, had been on the Hargrove family's acquisition list for 3 years running. They had been trying to buy it. They had sent 3 rounds of offers, each one slightly below fair value, each one accompanied by the implication that the current ownership didn't fully understand what they had. They did not know they had been making those offers to me. I looked at the folder for a long moment. Then I looked at the photograph on the corner of my desk. My brother and me, young, standing outside our parents' house on a summer afternoon. He was laughing. He always had the best laugh. After he died, I made a promise that I would look after what he left behind. My niece was what he left behind. I closed the folder and picked up the phone. I need you available starting tomorrow, I said when the voice answered. Of course. How serious? I thought about the typed letter slid across a table, about the words, service class, about my grandnephew's small shoes left near the bus station entrance, still damp from the rain. Serious, I said. The next morning I woke before sunrise. My niece was already in the kitchen, sitting with both hands around a coffee mug, staring at the window. She looked up when I came in. I keep thinking I should call Marcus, she said. You could, I said, but I don't know what I would say. She looked down. He sat right there while she handed me that letter. He was in the room. I poured my coffee and sat across from her. Do you love him? I asked. She thought about it honestly, which told me more than any quick answer would have. I loved who I thought he was, she said. I don't know who he is now. I nodded slowly. Then right now, you don't worry about Marcus. You worry about yourself and your son. She looked at me. Aunt Ruth, what are you going to do? I sipped my coffee. Have a few conversations, I said. She didn't push further. She had learned long ago that when I went quiet, something was already in motion. By 9 that morning, my office was occupied. My attorney sat across from me with a legal pad. My accountant stood by the window reviewing documents. A woman who had managed my business interests for 15 years sat at the corner of the desk with her own folder open. I walked them through everything. The acquisition inquiries from the Hargrove side over 3 years. The contacts, the proposals, the timeline, the pattern of offers coming in slightly below value with that particular tone of doing the seller a favor. They don't know it's you, my attorney confirmed. They think it belongs to a holding company, my accountant said. Which it does. They simply don't know who sits behind it. I nodded. I want everything clean, clear, and ready. My attorney looked at me carefully. What exactly are we preparing for? I thought about my niece in the kitchen, trying to figure out whether to call the man who had watched his mother treat her like a problem to be managed. A meeting, I said. And a lesson. 2 days later, my phone rang. A number I recognized but had never saved. Mrs. Caldwell. A man's voice smooth, practiced, the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. This is Richard Hargrove. I believe we have some mutual interests worth discussing. Richard Hargrove, the patriarch. I had seen him once, years ago, across a room at a charity event. He was the kind of man who believed he was reasonable simply because he was calm. Mr. Hargrove, I said. I'll be direct, he said. My wife tells me there's been a family situation, an unfortunate one. I want you to know that whatever has happened between the women, it has no bearing on business matters. Between the women, as though his wife had done nothing more than have a disagreement with an equal. I appreciate your directness, I said. Good. Then perhaps we can sit down. There's a property group we've had interest in for some time. I believe you may have a connection to the ownership. I'd like to discuss terms. I let a silence sit between us for a moment. I'd be happy to meet, I said. We agreed on the following Thursday. He named a restaurant downtown, private dining rooms. A wine list meant to signal importance. I agreed without comment. When I hung up, my niece was standing in the doorway of my office. She had heard some of it. Was that she started? Yes, I said. She shook her head slowly. He thinks it's two different things. The family and the business. He does, I said. But it isn't. No, I said. It never was. The days before Thursday moved strangely. My niece received a message from Marcus. Not a call, a text message. It said he was sorry things had escalated, that he hoped she was comfortable, that he was giving her space to process. Nothing about coming to get them. Nothing about his mother. Nothing about the letter. She read it twice, put her phone face down on the counter, and didn't pick it up again that evening. That night, she finally cried, not the quiet kind, but the kind that has been waiting far too long, that comes from somewhere deep and doesn't apologize for itself. She sat at the kitchen table and cried until she was completely empty. I did not tell her it would all be okay. I sat across from her and let her feel it all the way through. When she finally looked up, she said, I kept thinking that if I was just better, quieter, more polished, more whatever she wanted, it would eventually be enough. It was never about enough, I said. It was about control. She wiped her face. I feel so foolish. You trusted someone you loved, I said. That is not foolish. That is what you are supposed to do. She looked at me for a long moment. What's in the folder, Aunt Ruth? The one in your office. I looked at her, this woman with my brother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, a spine that had been bent hard but not broken. The truth, I said. About who we are. She didn't ask more. But something shifted in her face. Something that looked like the first small piece of something better. If you're listening right now, and I believe you are, then you know this feeling. The moment someone decides your worth before they ever knew you. When you understand that the contempt was never about what you did or didn't do. It was always about where you started. And if you have ever been made to feel like nothing by someone who never had to build a single thing from scratch, stay with me, because what happens next is for you. And if stories like this matter, if they feel like something real and true, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Ruby's Revenge Story. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thursday came grey and cool. I arrived at the restaurant 12 minutes early. I chose the seat facing the door and ordered water I didn't drink. Richard Hargrove arrived with his son. That surprised me, and it didn't. They walked in together, pressed shirts, confident posture. Marcus saw me and stopped for just a fraction of a second. He had met me twice, years ago. He had not expected me to be at this particular table. Mrs. Caldwell, Richard said, extending his hand. Thank you for making time. Of course, I said. Please sit. Marcus sat across from me. He would not hold my gaze for very long. Richard began exactly as I had expected. Pleasantries, then business. He spoke about the hospitality group as though discussing something abstract, something belonging to a faceless entity somewhere. He spoke about market timing, about what the Hargrove name could do for a property portfolio like this one. I listened. I let him talk. When he finished, I placed a folder on the table. Before we discuss terms, I said, I'd like you to look at something first. Richard opened it. Marcus leaned slightly to see. Inside were documents clean, clear, dated. Ownership records. My name behind the holding company, behind the subsidiary. My signature on the original filing from 31 years ago. Decades of clean audit trails laid out in order. Richard's expression did not change immediately. He was disciplined, but his eyes moved over the first page twice. You're the owner, he said quietly. I am, I said. Silence held the table. You've been sending proposals to my representatives for 3 years, I said. Each one slightly below market value, each one carrying the implication that the current ownership didn't fully appreciate what they were sitting on. I kept my voice steady. I appreciated it. I built it. Marcus set down his water glass carefully. Your wife, I continued, told my niece that her family had no name, no standing, that she came from nothing. I folded my hands on the table. I built 8 companies over 40 years. I own more commercial property in this region than your family has acquired in the past decade. I did it starting from a catering van, and my brother's faith and my own 2 hands. I paused. That is where my niece comes from. That is her standing. The private dining room was very quiet. Richard looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the tablecloth. We weren't aware, Richard began. You weren't curious, I said. There is a significant difference. Marcus finally spoke. His voice was lower than I had expected, and something in it had shifted. What is it you want? He asked. I looked at him, this young man who had sat in a room while his mother slid a dismissal letter across a table to his wife, who had sent a text message instead of driving to find them, who was sitting across from me now, finally, because his father needed something from me. I want you to understand what you walked away from, I said. Not a business, not a name. My niece. Your son's mother, he swallowed. She never misrepresented herself, I said. She told you exactly who she was from the beginning. A nurse, a hard worker, a woman from a family that built things without ever asking for credit. I looked at Richard. Exactly like me. Richard cleared his throat carefully. My wife's approach may have been, your wife's approach caused real harm to a real person and to a child, I said. That does not disappear because a deal falls through. It doesn't disappear because an apology is issued. I looked at both of them. What happens next depends entirely on what Marcus decides to do. Not for business. Not for appearances. For his son. Marcus looked up at that. She won't take my calls, he said quietly. I know, I said. You have to decide whether that changes anything about what you do next. Whether it changes who you choose to be. I stood up. The properties are not for sale, I said simply. They never were. I left before either of them could respond. Outside, the air was cool, and the street was quiet. I sat in my car for a long moment, with both hands resting in my lap. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Just steady. The way you feel when something that needed doing has finally been done. My phone buzzed once, a message from a number I didn't recognize at first. I opened it, 2 words followed by a third. I'm sorry, Aunt. Marcus had never called me that. He had always been formal, slightly distant, careful in the particular way people are when they are performing a role rather than living one. I sat with those 3 words for a long time. Then, I drove home. My niece was in the backyard when I arrived, watching her son move slowly through the grass, collecting whatever small things 3-year-olds decide are worth keeping. She heard my car and turned. She searched my face the way people do when they've been waiting for news they're afraid to hear. Sit down, I said. We sat together on the back steps. I told her everything, not the business details. Those could come later. I told her what I had said about where she came from, what I had said about what she was worth. I watched something in her face slowly, carefully unknot. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. He texted me, she said. After. He says he wants to talk. He says he's going to ask his mother to apologize. She paused. He says he should have spoken up a long time ago. And? I asked. She shook her head slowly. I don't know yet. I don't know if any of that changes things. She looked at her hands. I spent 2 years making myself smaller and smaller. I'm not sure I know how to stop doing that yet. You'll learn, I said, the same way you learned everything else. One day at a time. She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was young and the world felt too large for one person. Her son came running toward us then, one small fist raised high, holding something he had decided was extraordinary. He climbed directly into my lap without asking, the way children do when they have decided someone belongs to them. Grandma! He announced he had started calling me that at the bus station, and I had not once corrected him. Look. He opened his hand, a smooth grey stone from the garden. Ordinary, rounded, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know it had been found by someone small, who thought it was the finest thing in the yard. I held it in my palm and told him it was wonderful. Because it was. 3 months later, things were quieter, in the way that follows a real storm, not silent, but settled. My niece found a good apartment 2 miles from my house. She went back to work part-time at a clinic nearby. Her son started at a little daycare where he came home every afternoon with paint on his elbows and firm opinions about dinosaurs. Marcus had, in fact, asked his mother to apologize. She had done so in the careful, abbreviated way that powerful women apologize when they understand they have no other option without ever quite naming what the wrong had been. My niece accepted it for her son's sake. She and Marcus were talking again, slowly, cautiously, the way you test ice before trusting your full weight to it. Where it would lead, neither of them fully knew yet, but she was not waiting for his family to decide her future anymore. She was standing taller. She stopped apologizing for her opinions before she finished saying them. She called me on Tuesday evenings now, not because she needed anything, simply to talk. One afternoon she came by and we sat at the kitchen table with tea and the remains of a pie she had baked herself, which was very good. I keep thinking about what you said, she told me. At the restaurant. Which part? About where we come from. She traced the edge of her mug. I never thought of it as something to be proud of. I always just apologized for it. Like it was something to explain away. I looked at her. Your father built a family, I said. Your mother held it together after he was gone. I built 8 businesses because I refused to let other people's opinions about where I started and decide where I would end up. I shook my head. That is not nothing. That is everything worth having. She nodded slowly. Her eyes were bright. She called us service class, she said. Yes, I said. We served ourselves first. Then we built. She smiled. A real one. The kind that reaches all the way to the eyes and stays there. Her son wandered in from the next room at that moment and climbed directly into my lap, settling in without ceremony. I held him and thought about my brother. About how he would have laughed at all of it, the folder, the restaurant, the look on Richard Hargrove's face, when he understood who he had been negotiating with for 3 years, without ever bothering to look closely. He would have found it very funny. He would have said, "You always were the quiet one, Ruth." He would have been exactly right. If you've stayed with me all this way, then I think you already know this story was never really about a business deal or a folder full of documents. It was about what happens when someone looks at where you started and decides that must be where you belong. About what grows in the silence of people who should have spoken and didn't. And about the ones who build things quietly, without announcement, without asking anyone's permission. Real power doesn't introduce itself. It waits. And when the moment comes, it walks in calmly, carrying the truth. If this story felt like something real to you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or someone you love, or something you've survived, please like, comment, and subscribe to Ruby's Revenge Story. Your support keeps these stories reaching the people who need them. Maybe tonight, that's someone who needs to be reminded they are not nothing, that where they come from is not a weakness, that the quiet ones who build without fanfare, those are the ones who last. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for the people you love is simply refuse to let the world decide what they are worth. And sometimes that is more than enough to change everything.